Everybody, welcome back to Archaeology with Flint Dibble. I'm here with Dr. Damien Huffer, and while we get some people in the door, let's listen to our intro music. Okay, yeah. So here we are. We got some people in. Damien, it's great to see you again.
Hello.
Yes. We go back, I don't know, several years chatting online about this kind of stuff. And also, you last time I saw you, you came and zoomed in for a conference. I did an online conference on the ethics of zooarchaeology and stuff like that. So before we get going, I just want to warn everybody, while the thumbnail does not actually have real human remains in this, we will be showing images of real human remains. I'll give a couple warnings on that, but it's just want to make sure that everybody realizes that. Damien himself is a research fellow both at the University of Adelaide and at the University of Queensland, and he is a co-founder. I didn't realize you were a co-founder of the Alliance to Counter Crime Online, and as well of the Museum of Loaded Antiquities, which we can talk about both of those at the end, since I know they do very, very important things for our world.
Important but different, yes.
Yeah. But when I first came across you, you were talking about your recent book that you published with Sean Graham on this kind of not looted, but the trade in human remains. So I thought the first time I have you on, we should introduce this to people, even though I know it's finished research for you. It's mostly in the past.
The book is finished.
Yeah,
the task goes. The task doesn't end.
No. This is an ongoing task and an ongoing problem, as we'll see. Just to start off with something funny, don't trust those Halloween decorations you see of skeletons. They are fake bones. This is a fake skeleton on the left, which is sold for Halloween. This is a real goat skeleton on the right that's been mounted, and you can just see the bones just don't match at all. And they get even kind of crazier when they start adding kind of soft tissue to this stuff.
Hashtag who needs an osteologist, right?
Yeah, who needs an osteologist at all? Or, of course, you get crazy birds where they show like their wings, again, the fake ones on the left. And then look how cute this little raven is.
Looks like a weird video game character. It's great.
It really does. It could be. It wouldn't be out of place in Zelda or something like that.
No.
And then, of course, these crazy birds here. I mean, I don't know what's going on. And then look at this. We even have pumpkins with bones. So, Halloween has become Halloween. And by the way, people, tell me in the chat or comments about whether you like this new mic that I'm using. It's actually an old mic, but I'm trying and experimenting with new sound to see if we can improve the quality. But yes, so what we're going to be talking about is the actual online sale of real human remains. And this is a real serious issue. There's all kinds of online stores, TikTokers, Instagrammers. Are they on YouTube too? I don't even know if
on YouTube.
Some on
Not
YouTube.
necessarily selling, but
showing.
YouTube is used as a platform to display and cross-link to other platforms sometimes,
Because it's illegal to do so, or against the rules to do so, I suppose, on YouTube. Yeah.
That's against the rules on many of these platforms, but that doesn't stop anything.
Okay. Yeah. So The title of your book is These Were People Once, the online trade in human remains and why it matters. And so
Yes.
that's what we're kind of going to be looking at. And it's tough. You've been looking kind of all over. Is there it seems like it's literally on every single platform. Is there any platforms where they really do a good job of not allowing these trade in human remains?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the best examples at the moment are Etsy and eBay in
Mm-hmm.
terms of real human remains sales, and that's only eBay since 2016 and Etsy since 2012, thereabouts. Where through media exposure, even well before people were actually researching or writing about this topic, just the media found it. Well, simultaneously, there were some publications by like colleagues of mine, like Ryan Seidemann and Christine Holling, and others who wrote about the eBay market at its height in the mid 2000s. But um, that nascent interest academically or by bioarchaeologists or forensic anthropologists in the reality of today's online trade overlapped with the media pressure. But at that time, really, it was just like everyone went to eBay for stuff or Etsy. These were, well, much newer than they are today. But um, when this stuff was discovered on there, alongside a wide range of other types of trafficking in antiquities or wildlife that still occurs on these platforms, but the human remains really caught people's attention, raised a big stink, and actually, to their credit, they tweaked their algorithms and got out ahead of this. And for the most part, it's not perfect. There's still examples of and methods that dealers can advertise or talk about remains they have or for sale on one platform, and then put a sneaky link to a flash sale on eBay or a
Yeah.
flash shop on Etsy, and then to get someone's attention to it and then take it down. But
Mm-hmm.
to those platforms' credit, though, they really almost entirely stamped out what was a pretty sizable market.
And just to make clear, while you're talking about things like Etsy, why would this be sold on Etsy? Here's a video, for example, of the kind
Mm.
of jewelry that is made out of human remains that is sold, and that's why they tried to go to places like Etsy and eBay.
Mm.
So just warning, we're about to show jewelry made out of human remains.
Huh.
Um,
Yeah,
what were you saying?
they sometimes overlay lyrically explicit music on top of their videos, but
Yes. Yes,
yeah,
I'm sure they do. To make it
indeed.
seem cool.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's designed to give it a attitude and feel that
Mm.
makes it popular
Mm.
for people
Mm.
to go check out. Yeah.
And attractive to the algorithm to get likes, attention to it, clicks to it, more traffic to it. Yeah.
And you can even see the suture. Jesus Christ.
Mm.
It's like,
Mm.
because most of this you can't really tell, it's just white
And
material. But then yeah,
notice the skull there.
yeah.
Uh, you know, that skull in the previous clip was, broken, some fresh breaks, some old breaks, deep patina, missing teeth, many of the signs of, this is not a clean, processed, quote unquote medical specimen that found a second life in this person's private collection. He decided to cut it up and turn it into jewelry. They can also create and show off one thing, but have other items in their possession in the background of the videos and kind of double advertise, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what they do. They're double advertising because
Mm.
these shops, they don't just sell the jewelry. They sell sort of full on skulls and stuff like this, and they do
Mm.
it again using the kind of social media techniques that all kinds of people use. Like there's one that I found for this where the unboxing videos. This is a common thing that tech people or gamers, they unbox their new game. Well, this guy is unboxing his new skulls.
from a balcony doing the blue lawn chairs next to the ice.
Of course, the music, and then they're showing the medical aspects of this, which I think is part of the advertisement in a sense.
It's part of the advertisement, and it's designed to both appeal to certain, like a subset of collectors who would be after that specific type of prepared, quote unquote, medical specimens, but also to, in many ways, it's used to give the whole operation a veneer of above boards, ethically compliant. Everything's copacetic. Don't look here too much. We only have harmless, quote unquote, medical specimens. Where in the reality, dealers could have that and much more, or take those specific specimens, ignore all the background and story and ethical and moral quandary behind that trade's existence, and then do what that guy did and turn it into art and spare parts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's just nuts. And just to emphasize to everybody, this is very much a global issue. This is not limited to one country, one area of the world, one language, one culture. This is something that we see kind of everywhere. And the internet has made that, of course, far easier for these sales to happen. And
especially social media.
Yeah, especially social media.
Several magnitudes beyond what the e-commerce platforms we know typically carry or allow. And like we said, for their credit, eBay and Etsy have tried to get ahead of the issue and realize, hey, we don't want our platform to necessarily be synonymous with, having a runaway market for human remains. Let's try and do something about it. But many others haven't. Many turn a blind eye. And like all these headlines say, when you look at the full scope, depth, and breadth of the human remains trade, well beyond any one niche or subtype of collecting, then it's social media, e-commerce, auction houses, picks up in the media in multiple languages, like you said, Flint, and involving, in that case, in North Carolina, they stopped the auction just in time before these ancestors were sold off under the hammer, because Native American representatives of, I think, the Lumbee tribe in that case, were in the audience and made a huge protest as the auction was going on. And that basically, they shut it down with active nonviolent pushback, if you will.
And I think that's an important lesson that I hope we'll get to as we keep moving on, is that speaking up actually can make a difference. So I think that that's something that we will hopefully end on a bit, but let's preface that, is that we can actually combat this kind of stuff by, when we notice it, we can speak up, we can report it, we can protest it, and we can support those that are doing that kind of work to end this kind of issue. So
we try.
And then I think, as you point out in this slide, not only is this an issue, but they're actually, it's combined with, here's an outlaw motorcycle gang insignia, for example. So it obviously overlaps a lot with other kinds of illegal activities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was happy to be looking in the right place and the right space at the right time to find this individual's post. And they were so brazen to have their collection or part of their collection all together for a nice family photo. And I've used it to illustrate, that, not only is this an individual allegedly based out of Australia, and if it is to believed that the mirror insignia matches what I looked up and found that outlaw, the coffin breaker, the coffin cheaters motorcycle gang's logo on the jacket there. So does that mean that person's a member of the gang or not, or just a fan of them? We don't know. But they showed off that they have, a variety of human remains, whole skeletons, just skulls, but also animal remains too. Including, in fact, in the comments of this one, if you can see, on the far right, the bigger skull under the two human skulls.
I see that.
Yeah, right about there. Comments were asking him, hey, what is that one? He said, oh, that's a hyena. Oh, yeah, that's a baboon skull. That's not shocking to your audience that those animals are not native to Australia. So it raises all kinds of questions, of course. What my own work is pushing more and more into is the overlap between heritage crime, including antiquities and human remains, and aspects of the illicit trade in wildlife products, whether that's taxidermy, skulls, loose bones, whole skeletons of humans or animals, what have you. So much circulates around, and the big question is, of course, how many states or countries does it pass through? What's its history of importing and exporting? Does it have any permits or paperwork? Are we trading CITES or non-CITES species? Uh, what's done in collaboration with the law? What's done deliberately to get around the law? What's done because they don't necessarily understand the laws about the specific sales they want to do, unless they might risk buyer or seller getting into trouble down the track. It raises lots of questions, but we, in things like this, we look at and we see these snapshots of the end stage of the market. And then the task is, of course, to, like you said, get big enough data sets to not only have case studies to talk about, but big corpuses of text, of metadata, of images, of information to build up and kind of map and understand geographic differences in the markets, histories and movement of objects and of human remains. And me and many other colleagues are concerned with the culture of the trade as well, how it functions. These are all ongoing topics of interest for many people, researchers and the media. But yeah, I put that slide together and that image on it because it's a good example, as you said, that it's a global problem. That's a great illustration from Australia, and it shows this question of criminal convergence. That is, there's the rub. How many times and in what ways do these kinds of and do various quasi-legal or illegal markets of many things converge because the algorithms bring people together and they say, oh, you're interested in buying these species, do you want some humans? Are you interested in buying these artifacts? Do you want some human remains of the culture that these artifacts are from? And social media now is the dealer. It can bring people together and make those connections in ways that never could have happened before.
And it makes it so much easier for sort of small dealers, let's say, to go viral, if you will. And so, and I've seen this before and reported a bit on this kind of stuff, like obviously the trade in granite vases here, but also these kind of alien, obviously in air quotes, these mummies that were a combination of indigenous remains that were looted combined with animal remains. So the same kind of thing that we saw there, except used to deceive the public, so much so that these were presented in front of the Mexican Congress. And so that really shows the impact. It's looted antiquities combined with modern human or modern animal remains to do this, let alone the variety of different sources that you've kind of tracked down.
And combined with the gullibility, right? So like the gullibility of that, it can be done to us look so ridiculous, but they can sell it and package it and market it in such a way that it makes it, all the way in front of the eyes of or the floor of, the mass media or a country's Congress in this sense before it's eventually exposed. Like that also speaks volumes in my mind about how these trades can have two faces. The public face that really try and sell a certain image and angle, and all the stuff that has to go on behind the scenes to get the material, to fabricate the stories, to do the dirty deals on the side, and to actually make money change hands.
Yeah, exactly. And fundraising and stuff like that. So, okay, so you've done what I think is a really important sort of work, partly because there's this anecdotal stuff. I could show more videos and images and stuff like that of specific examples, but you've actually done a good job of trying to collect data in a more systematic way by scraping various online platforms and using digital humanities methods so that you're actually getting more of a bigger picture. How do you go about doing that? Like, what's the methodology involved? And
Um, some people, when this book was written, it was mostly done either manually, again through what we call the snowball approach. You when you identify certain keywords or hashtags or handles, then you can follow these threads, and then when you follow that, it brings up using this hashtag brings up these pages, these sales, these groups. Okay, then you investigate those. That leads to more, and it snowballs.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that manually. You can also do that by there's certain purpose-built codes or packages that can uh, deal with or get around API changes that some of the platforms, especially social media, used. Especially, well, okay, we wrote this in it was published in 2023. We were writing it in the 2 years preceding that, and at that time, uh, this was the time when especially meta platforms are getting more and more
Mm-hmm.
exposed, and initial pressure was growing across a wide range of sectors, and the media was piling on to say, look at all the things that go on in the shadows on these platforms, but are basically out in the open too. It's not the dark web. You don't need any of that. It's there if you know where to look. And then they started to try and change and tweak how their algorithm works or who can access the algorithm. And other people much more skilled in R and Python alike than I did made packages that they made open access that people could use um, at that moment to get around that specific change and
Mm-hmm.
do an automated collection. You put in the term and hashtag of interest, and the program would pull all the publicly available keyword publicly available images, sales posts, etc. that went along with
So
it,
okay,
and then eventually they changed
how
again.
large
Yeah.
is this data set that you collected? You're talking how many dealers, let's say, ish? 1,000, 10,000, 100?
Yeah, thousands. Some of the well, in the dealers, like clearly identifiable, distinct dealers at the
Yeah.
time of writing this and papers around that time on a platform like Instagram, for example, was in the
Okay.
hundreds. But that can still, when you combine it with other platforms, other means of advertising, uh, and some of the data sets we looked at for our first attempts to study the public Instagram human remains trade at scale in 2017, and then again in 2020, we're looking at cumulatively tens of thousands of posts
That
in
was
the
my next
data set that
question.
can be
So
assembled.
in a sense,
Yeah,
hundreds
big,
of
big, big.
dealers, maybe thousands of accounts posting to create a total of
Yeah,
tens of thousands of posts on all these different
yeah.
platforms.
Which your mileage may vary. It can fluctuate a lot. Um, and yeah, and people, pages or groups will pop
Yeah, of
on and
course.
off
Yeah, especially because they're
pretty
being taken
frequently.
down sometimes after they sell some stuff, and then yeah,
Sometimes, yeah, and then they'll pop up under a different name or a different handle, or
yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. That makes sense. So, what is the legal remains on this? What is the legality of trade in human remains across the world? I'm sure it varies, but like, is there a sort of standard involved?
No, the worldwide, the answer is it's messy and chaotic. To
Okay.
be honest, it's where there's any kind of many countries or states within those countries, like in the U.S., Australia, Canadian provinces, etc. In Western demand countries, they might have some bodies of legislation like human tissue acts, anatomy acts, those kind of things. And many of these are actually decently old laws that would, by proxy, and should be covering anything like the movement, harvesting, use, or transport or sale of tissue from very specific circumstances, like harvested from patients, clearly used and sent from one teaching institution to another teaching institution, and there's laws that govern how museums deal with human remains. There's laws that deal with, obviously funeral homes, crematoriums, mortuaries. All those are supposed to be under quite a lot of um, layers of legislation. And then in some cases, uh, law enforcement when seizures happen, like this case, they might try and go after it for cultural heritage purposes and say, well, through their investigation and usually the tapping of the knowledge of subject matter experts, which I've been myself, they can try to put forth an argument that says, yes, it's human remains. The human remains laws might not be specific enough to cover and legislate against in writing these specific examples that we've seized, but this would count as this culture's cultural heritage, or we can't, the law is a void on this specific instance, but they can investigate things like tax fraud, money laundering, mail fraud. There's options, and usually, like many kinds of trafficking, it's especially antiquities and human remains that have really not caught up yet in terms of global attention, global legislative attention, etc., to the likes of drugs or wildlife, which have much more spotlight, much more legislation. And even there, obviously, there's still plenty of loopholes and plenty of problems. But
Yeah.
in our world, in this kind of stuff, like, it's so patchwork that you have to either go at it through an obscure angle, go at it through a different but related kind of avenue of approach, and hope that all the right people can get on board to make a successful seizure and ideally a successful prosecution. But also from a civilian point of view, as one who's monitored this trade for a long time, again, like with antiquities, like with wildlife, we know that vast majority of stuff shipped around the mail any day from buyer to seller every social media anywhere in the world, much more goes through to its destination than is ever stopped or caught. And that's also another big issue that people are constantly trying to work on and get better at and devise better detective tools. But yeah, I gave this one example here that you do get seizures, they do happen, like this one too, but in my opinion, a lot more could be happening.
Yeah, and I think what you're making out is really clear as well, is that there really are not many laws specifically about this. Human remains are regulated in museum context or in mortuary context. You can't just go bury a body anywhere. But when it comes to, and obviously when it's cultural heritage, so looted ancient human remains, that is covered in different ways. But something like this, there's just nothing. This is, it's TikTok. This I found this video on TikTok, and it's like somebody made a gear shift out of a human femur, and
and again, this type of thing. Also, if you look at TikTok's own terms of service for TikTok Shop, especially, it's also supposed to be against their terms of service. They mention human remains in it. But just as Facebook does, and so Meta, so that would apply to Facebook and Instagram. Things like historic artifacts, heritage, human remains, in many of the big platforms that the world knows, like, the existence of this issue is not unknown by the higher ups, by the the tech overlords that set the standards and deal with the content moderators who are paid pittance upon pittance on the dollar to get traumatized by horrible stuff they're supposed to remove. And then so much that gets past them, of course, makes it through. But they know about it, the media knows about it and has reported on it quite a lot, and of course researchers, and thus via us to the public, also know about it by now. And yet in many cases we see these things still not even shrinking, but proliferating in many ways.
Yeah, and they're very clever to get around. You sent me this one example where they're selling the photograph of the mandible, and then they're giving as a free gift the mandible itself alongside the photograph. And they are very obvious that this is meant to get around the automatic filters.
This was a great example. It was part of that paper I wrote there, and I took a look in a number of spaces where human remains trade exists, but to an Australian market, because this specific rhetorical device of, buy the photo, get gifted the bones. I haven't seen that, and I still to date haven't seen that used by dealers or buyers or sellers in markets in any other location yet. Not the U.S., not Europe, not. It seemed to be a phenomenon that was devised and spread, but used only within the Australian collecting community to get around what they perceive to be Australia's rather strict import and export and human remains laws, which are, yes, not perfect. In fact, at the moment, they're actually under heavy negotiation for reform as we speak, but it's like human tissue laws writ large, which through my work, I've actually talked to the people doing this to try and get the reality of this, the private markets online for human remains of this type, to actually be considered part of the purview that needs to be taken into account for full and comprehensive legal reform. So it's not just how to make, the anatomy acts better or the use of tissue by medical schools, morgues, etc. better, but this has to be a part of it too.
Yeah.
And I found this phenomenon, and as to whether or not it's still being used after this paper was written, and the community has become aware that this paper was written, which it has. We'll see. Honestly, it's more a case of this maybe captures a moment in time of the rhetoric of this community in Australia, but doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a permanent way they sell. They might just join the rest of the world and say, you want bones, have bones, pay me money.
Yeah. And I think, and as you mentioned, I mean, on some platforms, they won't actually sell it, but they'll use that as advertisement to take you to their other platforms. So, I mean, there's all these kind of methods at play to get around the various rules and laws and things like that, which is obviously an issue. Here, you have some statistics here to get a sense of the overall trade. So in 2020, there was about 164,000 that you could track publicly, I'm guessing. This is just Instagram public sales. Which, wow, given that that's what you can find just on Instagram and publicly, it shows that that's just a fraction of what's out there, isn't there? Yeah.
And that's on, was it the left was public Instagram, and then the right was from a paper where we looked at a Dutch language platform, Market Plots, that and you can see this is weird because it, again, calculated as a total based only on what the data set we could compile, what we could see at the time, which again, as we said in these papers and we say now, it's not any kind of guarantee that it's capturing the whole market. Not. We take a sample with something as vast and as ever moving as, the internet trade of whatever. You can only sample it over a set period of time, take a snapshot, or do multiple snapshots with periods of time in between, whatever your methodology is, right? But you'll never, even with scraping technology, that still only gives you the snapshot of when that scraper was run, or the periods over time it was used.
Yeah. And especially because things can be taken down, accounts can be deleted. And in fact, your example on the right is intriguing me. This is from a Dutch language market plots. You see it rising in value and then all of a sudden shrinking tremendously. Is this because it changes in the rules of the platform? No. So they just moved to other platforms.
Still there. Rules haven't changed. It's something else. I think it's weird. I think in part you'd think it would be an increase even, considering how much everything moved to almost entirely online as COVID came in. But this kind of weirdly bucked that trend. It could be, yes, it could be possibly that by 2020, 2021, the algorithms were being tweaked a bit and maybe the volume of human remains containing sales were being lessened.
Or maybe they were moving to other more popular platforms like Instagram and stuff like that. And TikTok and whatnot.
Yeah, which I think is more likely because, you can still go on there and you can still find
exactly. Things. And then One of the other things you've been tracking is kind of the shift where human remains are moving from poorer global south countries to the demand, the market in the global north. Do you have more to say on this kind of pattern?
Yeah. So this was when I made this slide for the talk I was part of. I wanted to stress, obviously, that you can think of it, as that, how's it, the revival or the rebirth of that Victorian kind of colonial era ethos, where when people think of the bone trade, it's the first thing they always say is, "Oh, that was just a thing of the past." How museums got their old collections, what's repatriated now, that collections from the 1800s, 1900s, they're going back now, and that's a big part of it, and that's a separate issue. But today's online markets, in many ways, in my opinion at least, are basically a revival of the attitudes and the directional flows, in many ways, of remains and artifacts. Whether or not those remains left their global south country of origin decades or even longer ago and have been moving between collections in the West for who knows how long before they're seen on social media or they're seized. The broader idea of, the wealthier West, usually wealthier whiter West, collecting the, usually poorer, usually brown or black South. That's which colonialist looting and acquisition of artifacts of all types that's thrived on that. In today's trades, you see the same thing. And I think you see it especially more blatant and pronounced and in your face when it comes to those who collect human remains. Like the way they'll talk about it sometimes, the language they'll use, it's straight out of the worst of a colonial diary, basically, in some ways. But I also emphasize that it's important to understand that any source country, going to go to source country, can also be a demand country, and across a wide range of types of trafficking, from, again, wildlife, pets, antiquities, human remains, you have it. More attention is turning to, and more interest is now being paid to, the nouveau riche, the rising middle class and wealthy within source countries or source regions. What markets are they forming, and how much are they keeping their own, possibly looted, possibly dodgily acquired cultural heritage within their current region or country's borders, and making their own, high-profile collectors markets instead of letting everything flow out of their borders to the West. And we're seeing examples of that across many categories of investigation.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you've also sort of reported on how these are kind of conflict antiquities as well, like these examples of soldiers bringing material from Vietnam Wars, eerie souvenirs from the Vietnam War, as this person posted in the Washington Post. I mean, so this is a common phenomenon as well, that a lot of these human remains come out of violent regions.
Yeah. Either come out of, and that slide, so the talk I used that slide for was trying to discuss an area that's I'm only more recently interested in, is other scholars of cultural heritage crime in general for antiquities have been writing about and talking about a lot of conflict antiquities.
Yeah, exactly.
Cultural heritage artifacts coming out of and looted and sold and sought by collectors deliberately to take advantage of lax security and the destruction and devastation that happens in all the wars that are going on at the moment.
Of course.
And in recent
there's
years,
lots of evidence, for example, of ISIS, the terrorist group, doing industrial looting in order to fund their terrorism. We've now seen with the Israeli bombing in Iran, the recent news report was that Iran had ordered all antiquities to be shut down and protected because this is a big issue during periods of violence and chaos. There's lots of looting and sale of sort of illegal materials, in a sense.
Yeah. But so I tried to show with that slide and that talk that not only is, in that example, those were remains taken as trophies, during the Vietnam War, allegedly. And, what we know of their story, how long they were held in the States, and the juxtaposition between all the time, money, and effort that the U.S. and Australian and other Western governments still put into recovering their own war dead. But what to do about the war, not just the dead, but the fetishized dead, the trophyized dead from the other side of these conflicts, how to get them home to rest, I think this case had good resolution, if I'm not mistaken. But in that same talk, I mentioned, April this year, right? The sacking of Sudan's National Museum and their conflict. So it's like a repeat of what happened to the Iraq National Museum all over, it seems. Again, from what I've read in the media, I haven't been there, I'm not an expert, but it also seems like rooms containing human remains were also hit.
Yeah, for sure.
And who knows how many of those items have popped up on the markets by now. And that's the sad part. That's the worrying and the horrible part.
Yeah, total. And I mean, I like this quote that you have down here, which is, it's a no-brainer. Can you imagine some guy in Japan saying, I have 6 American skulls here in the closet. Do you want them back? And the government saying no. And it just shows this kind of lack of empathy for these other countries, because if it was our countries where they had our dead, we'd be like, no, this is totally wrong. But when it's some more impoverished area, it's sort of easy for people to say, no, we should be allowed to collect this stuff.
Yeah, totally fine. Then they become tribal art or primitive art, or they become the exotic other. They become what we've said in writing is commercialized or fetishized, and in so doing, they become what criminologists have talked about is like the criminogenic thing. Not only are they reduced to, they go from human to being referred to as specimens, pieces, things, what have you, usually pieces, that kind of stuff. That's how they talk about them. But when you use that language and rhetoric, and then it transforms them into a way to detach the remains from the person they once were, the remains from the culture they came from and were maybe designed and used in. When you have that schism, then at least to the mindset of some of these usually high-end collectors who would collect them, it's just another art installation. It's just another thing to have on your shelves. And then even worse is when some take it further and then starts adding layers of racialization and horrible colonial rhetoric on top of all that, in how they describe, the people they are selling.
No, exactly. And I think you make a good point that this is all about fetishization. Like these guitar picks carved from a human skull, to any ordinary people, these would look like sort of normal guitar picks, maybe a little off color, but it's that that they're from a human skull that makes them into a commodity. And so that's sort of how they use these kind of things to fetishize it. And you gave these examples of how they do this. You welcome this new club, and it's all about this dark stained Roman skull, this kind of thing with wounds and whatnot. And as you mentioned, the winking emoji showing how this is it I don't know, it almost disarms you into thinking this is cute and cool rather than being what it actually is, Yeah.
It is. Yeah, again, it becomes, prizes to show off their items. And I see someone in the chat who said, would they be antiquities? Well,
I think they were replying to this question, which I was gonna go to you at the end for the Q&A, which is, what are your opinions on animal remains such as mummified pets from Egypt? And those would be antiquities. Those would be illegal to export from Egypt since at least 1912, and illegal by international law of the UNESCO Heritage Convention, which almost every single country is a signatory on. So mummified pets from Egypt are 100% illegal and unethical to own, because they would have been looted, assuming you can even be sure that they're real, because they could also be forgeries.
Full of cement and nails.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not for owning mummified pets from Egypt or granite vases, because most of those things are forgeries, and some of them, the rest of them, are illegal. And then using this kind of stuff like trauma as we've seen, which $650 price negotiable with a bullet hole. So why are people so fascinated by this kind of trauma, do you think?
We've always said in our writing, again, me and Professor Graham and some of his and our mutual students and many of our colleagues, but the mantra has become, when talking about this, is that a lot of this community works by, it's the story that sells the skeleton, by our interpretation. There is so much, how do you say this? Like, everyone wants a good story. No one wants to, especially if you're in a niche collector community, you always want to have the most exotic, the rarest, the most unusual. You want to show, if you're going to show it off and show off what you've purchased, you want to also have that shock value. The look at me, give me more likes. Look at my status and wealth. Look at the rare specific examples I can get. Therefore, you can trust me as someone with the right connections and the sources. Now buy from me.
Yeah.
And again, the algorithm, especially on meta platforms, actively helps this system to work. When people are given, group expert badges and just not just admins, but admins, group experts, like rising stars, all these kind of things. That's the thing. These were all designed with, I understand, with zero intention. Well, the intention that it'd be used across the platform, like say across Facebook groups or Facebook, Instagram pages, whatever, where 99% of the people using them are using them for totally banal, benign, day-to-day average things. I'm selling my Beanie Babies. Oh yeah, I'm a rising star of the Beanie Baby world because I have this great collection. I know where to find the rarest one still in the box, whatever. But the problem comes when remains with, problematic or illegal true histories get mixed with the story the dealers attached to them, get mixed with the ability of any and all kind of trading space or social network in groups or out of groups on these platforms can form and then tap into and use the exact same boosting kind of boosting signifiers, to denote individual status in the group or in the community, to make themselves a node or a hub of a certain network. And then, of course, the problem comes is if that network is then devoted to dodgy or illegal stuff, whatever kind of trafficking, from child sexual assault material to human remains, antiquities, wildlife, what have you, they're still, because they operate pretty freely on these platforms, they can tap into all the same features that the 99% of other users who are using it for the intended harmless purpose would. There's no separation. And the networks that want to move illegal products or problematic material know that.
And this is why these networks need to take manual
tools.
Responsibility for what goes on there, because algorithms alone cannot solve this kind of stuff, because anybody can game algorithms, whether they are people selling fake archaeology to you or whether it is people selling human remains to you. Either way, these people are clever and have learned how to get these algorithms to work for them. And so I think that's it. And as you mentioned, I mean, I think that they are very expert. We've seen some of the videos they do. This example here shows how the stories behind the specific individuals on sale are part of the selling point. Violent deaths and exotic others and things like that. And so, it's just, and then this also occurs with the sort of these medical skulls, which of course were collected illicitly, illegally, unethically about 100+ years ago, but then end up now today on these markets as well, these antique medical skulls.
And especially, and this, where the bone trade has a visible public face, and some of the more social media savvy, outspoken dealers that are the easier ones to find, often say or claim that they only want to deal in these quote unquote medical remains. But again, as this example shows, not only do some in that sub area, that niche, right? Also, here they are highlighting, oh man, look at the trauma, look at the violent death this person might have encountered. But it's that same process of dehumanization.
Yeah.
You know, but the thought in many of these sectors is, well, if I say it's a medical specimen, if I keep it, or if it has clear evidence of having been turned into a medical specimen with the hardware or the cutting or labels on legitimately by former medical students in a hospital somewhere, that whole subsector of the community operates under the express desire that, you know, either potential buyers or potential individuals who would inherit, legitimately inherit, you know, old medical remains like this from, say, their grandfather's attic. You know, that's a real thing that happens a lot. The gap in the middle is they need the donors to understand or not understand that there are other options in basically the majority of Western countries where these medical schools existed and the remains have been de-accessioned into the private hands or kept and inherited. The dealers want the donors to understand that the only option is to sell into the private market to give it to them. Okay. And then they want the buyers, the ones they sell it on to keep it in the private market, to also understand that if you buy from me, you are then, you know, honoring and keeping intact a piece of medical history. But the disconnect is you're still buying and selling human remains. They're still moving between private people, private collections. It's still ignoring the fact that that doesn't have to be the fate of these remains. In the vast majority of instances, there are
far more ethical alternatives. Yeah, you could rebury them.
There are ways to do it.
Or as somebody says, in some cases they could be in anthropology departments from their home country, telling this story about why it's unethical. And, you know, this violence and weirdness is one of the key selling points that these dealers are using. They're taking advantage of this kind of othering, this kind of macabre sort of stuff to be able to profit off of your emotional reactions, in a sense. Yeah.
In the world of, online shock, clickbait, it's a lot of this, as you see here, a lot of this operates also in many ways and has such strong overlaps with how, you know, the pseudo-archaeology world sucks in new people as well. It's, you have to see it to believe it. You won't believe what I have until I show you. You know, it's, in this case, now I've got your attention, and I'm going to give you a good deal. So buy it from me, and you can trust me because look at all my collection behind me. I'm an established seller. I'm a, you know, I'm a go-to guy or gal for this kind of stuff. And it's, again, that all entirely strips away, and sometimes it plays up and directly emphasizes the reality behind how these individuals came into the trade to begin with.
No, I fully agree.
And it can be really gruesome. Take it from me. It's you know,
it's extremely gruesome, this topic. I'm normally sitting here laughing and joking around, even if it's about pseudo-archaeology, but this one is just like, how is this such a big thing and how is it so public? It's almost, I don't know, it still boggles my mind. Like,
it does.
That people find this to be so cool, let's say. So let's end, I guess, on sort of what we know and don't know and what we can do about this. So what do we know and what don't we know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I designed this slide and in the talks I've used it in to capture to like undergraduate audiences what I think gets to the heart of where I think research stands. And again, I want to emphasize it's not just me and my colleagues, but happily to see that there's growing academic and media attention onto this issue as well, along with, of course, other kinds of trafficking. But the bone trade is coming out of the shadows more and more in terms of public knowledge. even as it continues apace, at least awareness is being raised. So again, I'm also thankful for the invite to help in that effort here by this. But right, it's this brew of misinformation, stories that can be fabricated, realities that can be overlooked, combined with how the algorithms work across all these platforms, sales between platforms, the social media ecosystem, if you will, that really, in my opinion, how interconnected auction houses to e-commerce platforms to public and private social media to more short form social media, X when it used to be a thing, even Blue Sky, many other things. It's all now intertwined, and that intertwining can be a double-edged sword. And this is the bad side of that sword, if you will. And then again, we know that the networks that form with the purpose of collecting or trafficking, whatever the thing might be thereafter, is they know what we know about how this ecosystem works, right? And of course, they also know that enforcement is poor, terms of service might be there, but they're never really done much about, never really acted on. And of course, they know how to teach others about big old loopholes, rhetorical tricks, how to use the emojis, how to disguise or say weasel words to make a sale happen, but to, self-police just enough to prevent what they think the algorithm is going to do to them. Is they imagine, the algorithm will come and shut them down. If simultaneously they know that rarely happens. Like, we know a lot of things. Like, we know that the platforms themselves, like I said, they've become a dealer. They are the dealer now. They can make these connections for you, especially if you're a brand new person trying to enter one of these markets and buy your first skull. If you start and find one in, then that in will keep feeding you more ins. And we know, I want to also be clear, of course, like I said in that slide, like, as you saw, there's lots of different niches within the human remains trade. Some of it is tied to things like what we call the oddities subculture around the world. We know there's a shared ethos behind these type of collecting of oddities of all types. I'm not part of that community myself, but what's been interesting is we found that it does kind of cross-cut. The bone trade especially is much, much less of an elitist market than something like a lot of the antiquities trade, or at least the antiquities trade that you normally think about it, from auction houses, Sotheby's, Christie's especially, where thousands of dollars can exchange hands to get the latest prize items. I want to emphasize that bones are, even though they're only a small part of the oddities culture, of the oddities community, and I don't want to paint everyone at all with the same brush, because plenty are in that world and don't touch human remains at all, and good on them. But it would have stayed niche if it hadn't had all this help from technology. And then because it's blown up and the technology keeps connecting people, then you get these subcategories, these specializations, and they can form and start to form their own market. And that's where you see things like tribal art and collecting of skulls with stories of violence behind them or what have you. It's grown, it's expanded, it's kind of fragmented. It's kind of getting geographically fragmented too, even though technology and the algorithms and social media can still bring the whole world together at the drop of a hat. But we're seeing and we're understanding that fear and reticence is starting to want sales to only occur more and more within specific continents or countries or regions. And there's a bit of caution sneaking into the mix regarding sending overseas too much. I mean, plenty of it still happens, but we're seeing it's different. It's gone from a global free-for-all, and it seems to be growing in number, but also splitting into distinct, maybe smaller networks by type or by region. But it's complicated. And I want to say, and I said with this, like, there's still a lot that we looking on it from the outside, from, by research ethics, we are not participating members of this community. I have no desire to buy my own human remains, full stop, even though I'm a bioarchaeologist and forensic anthropologist by trade, by background. But I've studied this now, again, with colleagues for, let's see, 2015, basically 10 years, 10, 11 years now. So I think I have a good time depth of how things have changed in that period of time. I've seen some interesting developments, but by no means is that the end of the story,
No. And okay, do you have a little bit of time to wrap this up? Okay, I don't want to keep you too late since sure. I know it's late there. Let's end this component by thinking about what we can all do. What can the audience do to help? What can professionals and experts do? What's your recommendation for everybody on how we can actually, because look, we can't rely on these platforms. We can't rely, obviously, on governments. What can we all do?
There are some things. I mean, this was written for when I spoke to a group of professional anatomists, like an online anatomist association, who they call themselves the bioethics unicorns. And myself and Professor Graham, Sean, and Carlton, we gave a talk to them about what can they and their professional organization do. So we framed it as, professionals then, especially, anatomists, bioarchaeologists, forensic anthropologists, at the forefront of not only individually having a history of excavating and working with human remains, curating human remains, helping with the repatriation from museums, all these important other interactions with the dead. We would say to them, it's on professionals, and on the one hand, to help us push back against the nonsense and the stories that the private market can get out into the public consciousness through sometimes lazy media. But if we see reporting on the bone trade, or on a reporter will stumble across a dealer on Instagram and contact them, get quotes from them, write about, oh, how bizarre and cool. And we've had that experience where they've then found, our articles, myself and Sean, or grabbed our abstract online, took a uncontextualized quote out of it, and these naysayer bossy academics, so they're going to poo-poo on this, but here, let's focus all our attention on the cool photos the dealer can show us and the examples, right? So we said to professionals, if you see things like that, contact media you might know, or your societies, professional organizations. They'll have media contacts. Try and get on the record and push back against these things. And of course, do public outreach as much as possible. And then again, professionals, when we spoke to them, and I've said this in other contexts before, like, much like any kind of issue with the antiquities trade or heritage crime, human remains trade, there is no reason whatsoever for anyone with any kind of professional training, education, or background, even just at the BA level or BSc level, and certainly not beyond, in things like bioarchaeology, forensic anthropology, no matter how much you're fascinated by it, do not, it would be irresponsible, possibly illegal, certainly immoral, certainly unethical for you to, if approached by a dealer online, let's say you've set up your own social media profile to show that you're a bioarchaeologist, you've gone on excavations, you've done it correctly, ethically, etc. You might then get found by dealers who don't have the expertise. They just collect these remains because they want to have the remains. They might have a lot of questions. They might not know who they're collecting. They might reach out to you and say, "Could you give me the gender, the age, the race, the demographic profile of this skull? Oh, it's in my collection."
this is a real issue with
try to
Antiquities
emphasize
as well, is, you know,
Yeah,
like this is
absolutely.
why we don't publish Antiquities from private markets. People were asking earlier about the private collection of Egyptian
Exact
stuff.
same.
To be honest, as a scholar, and I study bones as well, I would never reply to anybody who owns bones or artifacts privately, because I do not know the background of the provenance. I do not want to authenticate something that can be illegal, that was potentially looted, that was potentially exported illegally, because then I'm supporting it. As soon as I authenticate it, it gives reputation, it gives validation for this kind of material. It's why I don't engage with these people that have all those granite vases, for example. I will be making a video about granite at some point, but I will never engage with any of those people because I don't want to be seen to be authenticating any of their objects as possible real artifacts. But who knows? They could be forgeries. They could be real artifacts. We don't know without a real provenance or an excavation. Yeah.
Indeed. And similar with human remains too. Like, so much passes from A to B online, gets through the mail, gets through the post, gets through ports of entry to its destination. And again, we see and capture data on usually the end side, sometimes the middle of that market, mostly. When law enforcement seizures happen and they tap civilian experts, then much more thorough investigations can begin. And then if law enforcement is involved, then they might have a chance to actually seize the electronic devices of the people involved and see some of the stuff that the platforms themselves make sure is totally encrypted and end-to-end encrypted messaging. So a lot of what goes into some of these sales, of course, we're not going to see.
Yeah, of course,
because they can do it all by messenger and it's hidden. But the public too can also follow a similar approach. Like, you see a post pop up if you're just on the platform by accident, you know, don't like it, don't engage with it. If you can reporting it, you might think it does nothing, but the more something is reported, especially if you find something egregious, you share it with people you know and say, hey, everyone, here's someone selling remains in our area. Let's all report it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let someone will screen capture it so you have a record of what was there in case it disappears.
And don't hit buttons like dislike or something like that, because even that kind of engagement, the social media platforms boost bad engagement as well as good engagement. So screenshotting is responsible, reporting is responsible. If it's something that might relate to a local jurisdiction, for example, of experts like a museum or police, that's other ways you can get in touch with people. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then, and especially if you're, you know, let's say a member of the public, but you also have interest and background in general osteology, bioarchaeology, and forensic anthropology, and can pass on the information to relevant offline local authorities who can then elevate it and you can attach even just your own very general assessment of what you think you're seeing in terms of the remains themselves. Even that can be very valuable and actually lead to further actions sometimes.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
So it's not hopeless. There's stuff that we can all keep doing. We can all, you know, the more people who are aware of it, in my opinion, that means the more we can keep an eye on it. That means the more we can help to expose it, fight it, and
on that note, I think it's important to promote these two initiatives of yours, you and others, of course, the Alliance to Counter Crime Online, where this is one place that you can go for more resources and potentially getting in touch and get involved and donate. I'm putting the link into the chat for counteringcrime.org. It's also in the details of the video. So yeah, you can get involved, you can contact, you can learn more about these kind of online harms that exist right here. And so this is one of them. What else does this this initiative cover?
Yeah, excuse me. I'm one of 7 who co-founded this in 2018, and we are a broad collection of about 30 academics, journalists, investigators, some representing other NGOs that are partnered with us, and it's a whole gamut of things. We have people involved looking at CSAM material, various aspects of wildlife trafficking. Antiquities, human remains, to some extent drugs with machine learning, um, other specialized markets, and also tangential things that also profit from algorithmic connections. Like, horrible, I couldn't do this. People trying to go after animal cruelty videos, dog fighting videos, these kind of horrible things. A wide variety of things. You can see some of it there. We're building and we're slowly getting this website a bit more fleshed out. So do watch this space. And you can find us on Blue Sky too, at Countering Crime. X is basically dead, but we have that channel as well. If you want to hear more and read more about it, you can download any of our reports as PDFs for free as well. We're really all about, much like with academic research that I've been involved in, it's exposing, documenting, analyzing, trying to get media and public attention towards, and ultimately the goal of ACCO is to push for policy and legislative reform, especially in the United States. They have the Communication and Decency Act, Section 230, which gives these platforms broad legal liability for, they could be a neutral third party that anything anyone puts on them, they basically suffer no repercussions, which goes to explain why in many cases they can have terms of service but not really have to actually enforce it.
Which is always fun.
Yeah. So that's what we're about. That's ACCO.
Okay, and then you have you have another great initiative
Yeah.
that you've also founded, the Museum of Looted Antiquities. You have to be careful with the acronym because MOLA can also mean the Museum of London.
I know.
But
you're aware of that. They chose that acronym. They chose it first and then realized that MOLA also had Museum of London, but we made clear to keep it.
I figure you were. I thought it was a little shade cast on MOLA, but no, I'm joking.
No. We have nothing against MOLA. No. It just happened to be matched to words.
So tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, that's just right. It's myself, LA-based journalist Jason Felch, ex-journalist.
Oh yeah, of course.
Now
Chasing Aphrodite.
Yep, he and his colleagues. Yep, Chasing Aphrodite, exactly. Myself, Catherine Davidson, who was one of Professor Graham's recently graduated PhD students, and has worked with us on some bone trade stuff. And now we're growing. We have other contributors and editors. It's all pro bono, but it's all about basically making a digital repository of cases that document what we call like the great give back, the push since the 80s really for more and more repatriations of antiquities from museums around the world to go back to the country of origin. So we research and edit and post case studies of all types. This is growing substantially. I do Blue Sky and LinkedIn post the case of the day to try and get word out about either old ones already in our archives or new ones that'll be coming. Just when I can, and it's not my day job, but it's something that all of us involved, we like the initiative. We think it's grown a decent amount since we started it. Actually, we're impressed and happy that we're getting some good traction on this. And it's really just to have a permanent, separate kind of record for these that can also link to some of the actual
quick question.
Files and documentation that's behind these cases.
So all of these are examples of artifacts that have been repatriated already.
Yeah. Okay. It becomes a case when a repatriation is happened or is set to happen.
So I was curious about the ethics of you guys reporting on this. Do you have collaborations with the countries of origins that they were repatriated towards, or anything like that? Or is it meant to raise awareness? How do you think about that?
Raise awareness, and like we have a Discord channel where It's invite only, but we have growing number of members of researchers and students from many of these countries who are interested in helping us find and add other cases that that we may have missed, because again, it's still relatively new, and undoubtedly many of our members would have their own personal connections to researchers or museums or science in many of these countries. But mostly we put them out there because these are all cases that have already been repatriated and they're already basically in the public sphere. So we're not putting out anything that's we shouldn't be, or putting out anything that is still classified or anything. These are all cases that have already happened, have already been covered in the media, have already been either tried in court or have documents associated with them. So we keep it very copacetic that way. And
so it's not meant to raise awareness to objects that should be repatriated. It's objects that have already been repatriated and reported.
Oh yeah, because again, we want to document. The goal of it from the beginning was like, this is the first initiative to try and put together and systematically quantify just how big the scope of this great give back has been since the 80s. Like, what kind of numbers are we looking at in terms of total stated value of items that once they at one point had been sold or auctioned on the private market, ended up in museums, and now have been given back. But there's a lot of disparate individual cases out there that people knew and experts knew around the world, and we hope that this can be something to kind of bring it together more cohesively. And then there'd be a lot of room for researchers, students interested in approaching us using some of this data to get a sense or like micro slice it to look at specific questions or specific issues, specific types of repatriations to specific countries, etc. I think it's just begun in terms of what we hope we can do with this. But again, we do it on our own time because all of us have other work jobs that we have to prioritize. Yeah,
that makes
as you know.
Yes, as we all know, all this stuff to publicize stuff takes work, and we're very rarely remunerated by it, which is part of the problem. But hopefully, we can keep supporting each other. But yeah, so the links are there, and please do support either ACO or MOLA, the Museum of Looted Antiquities. Yes. I have no problem with the Museum of London either, but So let's respect Damien's time. I know it's late there. I have, for those that know, my patrons and channel members get access to ask questions first. The rest of you put some questions in the chat. I've pinned a few of them, but we have one question that came in from a channel member. Would be interested in your thoughts on the trade in ancestor skulls from Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I'm certainly sure they exist. I've seen examples of dealers there in source, and this was in Thailand, showing off remains that still had dirt on them that were looted, along with grave goods, bronze items, bronze bangles, jewelry, etc. So clearly from recent looting of a cemetery. Unfortunately, I don't think really any ancient culture that buried their dead or cremated their dead or otherwise treated their dead in a way that has lasting remains behind, that today could not possibly be the subject of some collector's desire or find its way into the market, whether a long time ago or recently. I think a big lesson that I found in my 10 years of studying this so far is that unfortunately there's almost nothing that's off limits.
Yeah, that's for sure. That is for sure.
Yeah, which is the most horrifying thing about it, but it's also kind of the reality.
So, okay, we have some questions from the chat that came up throughout. I tried to star a few. So it's clear there's a decent-sized market in human remains with dealers being open on social media. what kind of response do you see from law enforcement? Is it only those seizures at the border, or do you see when they get reported, is there any active drive to stop it at all due to reports?
The best I'll say is that response is growing, but it's still varied. It depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on how many people are available to work on that in this sector. Anything with heritage, some places there aren't really many, or it's been deep. Unfortunately, many things like not just human remains, but antiquities, even in many ways, wildlife is still, in my opinion, much more deprioritized by governments, at least, than other types of online or offline organized crime, like weapons or drugs or, CSAM material, human trafficking. And while, of course, on the one hand, you can kind of understand that because you want to go after the biggest networks or the cases where immediate harm is being done to living people right in the moment. And so I understand it from that point of view. But from the point of view of someone who's researched this, the more we do this work and try and connect with and be available to law enforcement, the more that side's also become aware of the reality of this. But the most I can say is that it's happening, it's changing. We're not where I'd like it to be yet in terms of time, money, and effort to be across it 24/7, but it's a work in progress.
Yeah, for sure. On the note of the wildlife trade, there was a recent TV show I saw that I think it brings a lot of attention to it, which is called Bug Out. And it's about the heist at the Insectarium in Philadelphia. I'm from Philadelphia, so I was interested in it. I knew some people that asked me to help promote it because I knew some people that were involved in the production of this. But so I saw it online, and it's a really cool 4-part series into this heist where all these exotic insects were stolen from the Insectarium, but it also delves into the whole exotic insect trade. So I highly recommend that to people. Well,
can I ask you to send me a link to that by email?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, we'll do that right afterwards for sure.
Cool. All right.
What other comments do we have? We have what do you think about medical museums teaching that sort of history with human remains? So that's obviously an issue. A lot of museums and a lot of hospitals and training hospitals and universities have material that was collected a long time ago unethically. Of course, obviously, dentists need to train. So do doctors. They need training. So how do we deal with this kind of ethical issues involved?
I think it's a very different issue than having these remains be deaccessioned or just passed from private hands to private hands. In the latter, right? In the private markets, again, the real story could be known or could be fabricated. The real history of the medical trade could be put front and center or whitewashed. Often you see a mix, if not much more towards, hey, these are medical bones, that covers all sins, buy them now, with even if sectors of the market will say and talk to anyone who will listen that, oh yeah, we're collecting to save the remains, we're going to teach us, dentist students with our collection because otherwise they won't get this training. Well, no, there's many options for actual students and professionals to get the training they need by legitimate channels through body donation programs, through, remains that might have come in from the same medical bone trade into a still functioning university department, teaching hospital. The difference is in the professional setting, they're much more likely to be, contextualized. The story, the reality of the Indian or Chinese bone trade back in the day won't be glossed over. Will be given as key information, context, so that individual whose remains you're learning from, their whole story can be part of your education. And again, fundamentally, then it's not, as long as those remains are kept within that professional setting, curated, cared for properly, then they're not deaccessioned and attached a price tag to again. or in my opinion, figuratively had violence redone to them through that sale and put back onto the market. It's
Yeah, no, I fully hear you. And it's obviously also tricky even teaching this history with human remains. I've seen the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia come under fire for trying to do a little bit of that. I've seen obviously the Pitt Rivers Museum come under fire for that. I had a conversation with Dan Hicks about that fairly recently, a couple months ago. One last question for you, Damien. This is a long one. Let's say Johnny just inherited his grandfather's house in Florida, and among the things he found is a series of skeletons of indigenous Americans that was looted from the Indian Wars. Some are documented from where it was collected, but most don't have any documents. What should Johnny immediately do, especially for the skeletons that came from unknown origin?
Yeah, okay. If it's a case in the context that you mentioned where they're known or alleged to have been Native American, looted, and historic, then that's 3 big red flags right there for Johnny. So the best thing to do would be make sure, as much as you can, all the remains present are, well, first of all, stored and gathered up properly in proper boxes, the best you have. Do your best to make sure that this, the skeletons are individualized as much as you can. If it's a very commingled box of assorted bones, well, then don't mess with it too much, or Johnny shouldn't mess with it too much. I'm assuming we're all being hypothetical here. Let's say we're being hypothetical.
It's a long-term channel supporter, so I'm hoping so.
But okay. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But in that case, first and foremost, you track down the representatives of the closest and the closest Native American tribe.
So if it's human remains, wouldn't you want to get in touch with the law enforcement first, just to be sure?
Yeah, you contact them too, of course, but I'm assuming that they have context or some other knowledge saying, these are specifically known to be, or have some kind of document or even a soldier note or some historical provenance relevant information attached to them saying most likely from this time, from this place, from this context. If that's the case, then yeah, you notify law enforcement for sure, and they'll have to check in many districts that it's not in fact a forensically relevant occurrence.
Yeah. And I'd also recommend maybe getting in touch with the local museum or university anthro department, because they might help you know which indigenous tribes to get in touch with, which might not be readily apparent.
True. Yeah, depending on the part of the country or world, yes. But especially you don't want, in that specific situation, let's assume it's valid as written, you don't want to leave NAGPRA reps and Native American reps.
No, I meant that not to give it to the museum, but to get their help and their expertise with NAGPRA so that you know who to get in touch with.
Basically, you get it all together, you get it, checked by law enforcement, probably initially, and then make sure that it goes into the right professional and descendant community hands ASAP. And then it becomes out of your personal jurisdiction, and then they can then figure out what's the best approach from there, or how to return it to the community if it's determined that the remains can be directly returned to that specific community.
And then they can be properly buried.
Or what to do, or they might find it, either reburied or put in a keeping place, or have an agreement between the tribe and a relevant university. Depends on that, will be for them to decide. But if you found that in your house, then okay, well, he's curious about the law, that's fine, but
and he notes that he's from Asia, he doesn't live in the US, so therefore he's not. This is a hypothetical entirely, though maybe it's one of the friends. No, I'm joking. I think the key point here is to contact relevant experts and legal representatives to make sure to do right by them in an ethical and legal way. To
put it another way, the worst thing you can do, the absolute number one thing you shouldn't do, is either keep it to yourself and tell no one, or put it back into the market.
Well, definitely the worst would be to put it back into the market. The second worst would be to just keep it to yourself. You should take responsibility for
Yeah.
what you just inherited and what you own.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the worst would be
Yeah.
to put it on the market.
Remember-
That would be absolutely just perpetrating
Yeah.
violence.
Indeed.
Perpetuating.
Because remember, you've inherited not just things, but you've inherited
Yeah,
people.
exactly.
They might be dead, but in my opinion, and opinions of many others across many cultures, like we said in our book, like, you know, these were people once, but they still are.
Yeah.
You know?
And on that note,
They need to be
given all the
treated
ethical
and
issues with
protected.
people, it's one thing that certainly when I pass, I will be donating my body to science, because we also need to train people how to do medicine and dentistry and to study this material. So everybody, but it needs consent is the key thing. So
Indeed.
if you personally have no issues with it, as I see people online, they say, whatever, it's just dead people. Well, then make sure to donate your own body. So that if you're fine with that, then do that instead of doing the harm to others who have not consented.
Indeed, that's the thing. Like even the medical skeletons, like any assumption or aspersion that there was free and informed consent in any of these situations is nonsense. Like especially several decades to century plus ago.
Though it obviously varies from culture to culture. There's some cultures where they display their dead differently than others, which is something that I think is important to get across. So different cultures have different values on their dead. But
in many situations, though, you'd find that even the cultures with different displays, different values, different approaches, and different attitudes towards how close their dead can be to them. From death onwards, you know what you don't find that's common? People willing to say, "Oh yeah, take my ancestors and sell them to some random person."
Yes, that is not common.
Put them on
Occasionally,
Facebook.
people are fine with their ancestors being on display in museums or something like that, but not with that. Yeah. Okay. Well, Dr. Huffer, it was great to have you on.
Thank you so much. It was
Make
great
sure
to be here.
everybody leave a like and a comment to feed the algorithm machine. I'm, for one, this is my first time using this new mic. Tell me whether you think that this new mic is better or not. I will work on trying to upgrade it if we think it is. My other Lavalier mic is nice, but maybe this one gives a better tone. Otherwise, thank you all, and we'll see you for the next one.
Thank you all. Dog last deadline. Dog last deadline. That was great.
Yeah, that's what John says.
This is fun. I was actually been nervous.
Oh, you shouldn't be nervous.
No, this ran very, very well.
I'm as casual as can be with this. Love and archaeology to all.